During the scorching heat of trooping the color, a young royal guard collapsed in front of thousands of people and cameras from around the world. His military career seemed over, his dignity shattered in an instant. But what happened next changed everything. 9-year-old Princess Charlotte witnessed his fall and couldn't stop thinking about him. What she did in secret, without telling anyone, without asking permission, would bring this broken soldier to tears. She gave away one of her most precious possessions, wrote a note in her own handwriting, and made sure nobody knew about it. The media missed it completely. But when the truth finally came out months later, the world stopped to listen. This is the untold story of a princess who saw past the uniform, a soldier who found hope in his darkest moment, and a secret act of kindness that nobody was supposed to know about. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the parade grounds of Buckingham Palace. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and distorted everything in the distance. The temperature had climbed to an unusual 32 degrees Celsius, uncommon for London even in July, and the forecast promised it would only get hotter as the afternoon progressed. The royal family was scheduled to attend the annual Trooping the Color ceremony, a grand military parade celebrating the monarch's official birthday. Thousands of spectators lined the streets, and the world's media had positioned their cameras to capture every moment of the spectacle. Among the rows of ceremonial guards, standing at perfect attention, was Guardsman Thomas Whitmore, a 23-year-old soldier from Manchester who had joined the Grenadier Guards 2 years earlier. This was his third time participating in Trooping the Color, but his first time standing in such a prominent position, directly in the sightline of where the royal family would be watching. He wore the full ceremonial uniform, the iconic red tunic made of thick wool, the heavy bearskin hat that added nearly a foot to his height, white gloves, and polished black boots. The uniform weighed approximately 15 pounds and was designed for British weather, not a heat wave. Thomas had been standing at attention for nearly 40 minutes when the royal family began arriving at the palace balcony. He could see them in his peripheral vision, though he kept his eyes fixed straight ahead as training demanded. The crowd's cheers grew louder as each family member appeared. King Charles and Queen Camilla took their positions first, followed by Prince William and Princess Catherine with their 3 children. Princess Charlotte was 9 years old that summer, a bright and observant child who had inherited her mother's poise and her father's sense of duty. She wore a pale blue dress with white trim, her hair styled in neat waves. Looking every bit the young princess the public adored, but beneath the polished exterior was a girl with remarkable emotional intelligence and a keen awareness of the world around her. While her brothers, Prince George and Prince Louis, focused on the spectacle of the military parade, Charlotte's attention wandered to the individual soldiers standing so still in the blazing heat. From her position on the balcony, Charlotte could see the rows of guards in their red uniforms. She noticed how some of them swayed slightly, how others locked their knees to remain steady, how the sun reflected off the gold buttons on their tunics. Her mother had explained to her once that the guards had to stand perfectly still, no matter what happened, that it was part of their duty and training. Charlotte had asked what happened if they got tired or sick, and Catherine had explained that they pushed through it. That dedication to duty was part of being a soldier. But as Charlotte watched, something caught her attention. One of the guards, positioned prominently in the front row, seemed different from the others. While the other soldiers maintained their rigid posture with apparent ease, this particular guard appeared to be struggling. His hands, which should have been perfectly still at his sides, trembled slightly. His normally straight posture had developed a barely perceptible lean. Charlotte squinted against the bright sun, studying him more carefully. Thomas was in trouble, though he was trying desperately not to show it. The heat was becoming unbearable. Sweat poured down his face beneath the heavy bearskin hat, soaking his collar and running down his back. The thick wool uniform trapped the heat against his body, creating a personal sauna. He had not eaten much breakfast that morning, nervous about the ceremony, and now he was regretting that decision. His vision began to blur at the edges, and a wave of dizziness washed over him. He knew the warning signs. During training, they had been taught about heat exhaustion and the importance of recognizing when your body was approaching its limits. but they had also been drilled on the absolute necessity of maintaining position during ceremonies, especially high-profile events like this. Fainting on parade was considered a serious failure, a mark of shame that could follow a guardsman throughout their career. Thomas gritted his teeth and tried to focus, willing his body to hold together for just a bit longer. Charlotte tugged on her mother's sleeve gently. Catherine was watching the military procession and speaking quietly with William about something. Charlotte whispered something to her mother, her small face creased with concern. Catherine followed her daughter's gaze to the guard Charlotte was indicating, studied him for a moment, then whispered something to William. The Prince of Wales glanced at the guard, his expression growing serious, then quietly signaled to one of the royal aides standing nearby. But it was already too late. Thomas felt his knees begin to buckle. He tried to lock them, tried to force his body to obey. But the combination of heat, dehydration, the lock-knee position had reduced blood flow to his brain. The world tilted sideways, and despite his best efforts, Guardsman Thomas Whitmore collapsed onto the parade ground. The reaction was immediate but controlled. Fellow guardsmen who had been trained for such situations moved smoothly into action. 2 soldiers broke formation and quickly moved to Thomas's position, lifting him under the arms and carrying him away from the parade area toward the shade and waiting medical personnel. The crowd gasped and murmured. Cameras swung to capture the incident, but the parade continued without pause. This was not the first time a guard had fainted during a ceremony, and unfortunately, it would not be the last. Charlotte watched the whole thing with wide eyes, her hand gripping the balcony railing tightly. She saw the guard fall, saw how his heavy bearskin hat tumbled off and rolled a few feet away on the ground. She watched as his fellow soldiers carried him away, his legs dragging slightly, his red uniform stark against the green grass. The little princess felt a tightness in her chest, a feeling she could not quite name, but that made her want to do something. Anything. To help, Catherine noticed her daughter's distress and placed a comforting hand on Charlotte's shoulder. She explained quietly that the guard would be fine, that medical personnel were taking care of him, that sometimes the heat was just too much even for strong soldiers. But Charlotte continued to watch the spot where the guard had fallen, her mind working through something that the adults around her could not see. The ceremony continued with its usual pomp and precision. The military bands played, the soldiers marched in perfect formations. The Royal Air Force flew overhead, leaving trails of red, white, and blue smoke. The crowd cheered and waved flags. The royal family waved back, smiled for the cameras, and fulfilled their ceremonial duties with practiced grace. But Charlotte remained quieter than usual, her thoughts elsewhere. After the formal ceremony concluded, the royal family retreated inside the palace for a private lunch. It was a tradition after trooping the color, a chance for the family to relax together before they might have additional evening engagements. Charlotte ate her meal mechanically, responding politely when adults spoke to her, but not engaging with her usual enthusiasm. George teased her about being too quiet, and Louis tried to get her attention with silly faces, but Charlotte remained subdued. Catherine noticed, of course. Mothers always notice when their children are troubled by something. After lunch, she found Charlotte sitting in one of the palace's smaller drawing rooms. Looking out the window toward where the parade had taken place, Catherine sat beside her daughter and asked gently what was wrong. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, then asked what would happen to the guard who had fainted. Would he be in trouble? Would he lose his job? Was he okay now? Catherine explained that the guard would not be punished, that the heat had affected many people that day, that he was being cared for by medical staff. She told Charlotte that sometimes our bodies have limits, no matter how strong or dedicated we are, and that recognizing those limits was not weakness, but wisdom. Charlotte listened carefully, then asked if they could find out the guard's name, and, if he was really all right. Catherine was touched by her daughter's compassion, but explained that there were protocols about the royal family making direct contact with individual service members outside of official channels. She could ask the equerry to check on the guard's condition, which she did, and was told that Guardsman Whitmore was recovering well, had been treated for mild heat exhaustion and dehydration, and would be fine after rest and fluids. Catherine relayed this information to Charlotte, expecting it to satisfy her daughter's concern. but Charlotte's mind was still working on something. That evening, after the family had returned to their residence at Kensington Palace, Charlotte went to her room and began searching through her personal belongings. She had a collection of special items, gifts she had received over the years, souvenirs from trips, and personal treasures that meant something to her. She was looking for something specific, something that felt right for what she wanted to do. She found it at the bottom of her jewelry box, a small item she had received 2 years earlier. It was a military challenge coin, a tradition in armed forces around the world, where special coins were given to recognize excellence, boost morale, or thank someone for their service. This particular coin had been presented to Charlotte during a visit she had made with her parents to a military base. The commanding officer had given coins to the whole family, explaining their significance and the tradition behind them. Charlotte held the coin in her small hand, feeling its weight, running her thumb over the embossed design. The coin featured the royal crest on one side and the insignia of the regiment on the other. It was not particularly valuable in monetary terms, but its significance was profound. Challenge coins were deeply meaningful in military culture, representing respect, recognition, and connection between service members and those they served. The young princess made a decision. She would give this coin to the guard who had fainted, not through official channels or handlers, not as a public gesture that would be photographed and reported, privately, personally, as one human being acknowledging another's struggle and dedication. She did not fully understand all the complex emotions driving this decision, but she knew with certainty that it felt right and important. Charlotte found a small envelope in her desk drawer and carefully placed the coin inside. Then she sat down with a piece of her personal stationery, the kind with her monogram at the top, and began to write. Her handwriting was careful and neat, the product of years of instruction in penmanship. The message was simple but sincere, expressing gratitude for the guard's service and wishing him a quick recovery. She signed it with her name and drew a small heart beside it. The next challenge was figuring out how to deliver the gift. Charlotte knew that if she told her parents what she wanted to do, they would either handle it through official channels, turning her personal gesture into a formal palace communication, or they would gently discourage her. Explaining all the reasons why direct contact was complicated by protocol, she needed help from someone who understood both the royal world and the importance of what she was trying to do. Charlotte thought immediately of her personal protection officer, a woman named Sarah Chen, who had been assigned to her detail for the past year. Sarah was in her early 30s, warm but professional, and had a way of treating Charlotte like a real person rather than just a job assignment. More importantly, Sarah was former military herself. Having served in the Royal Military Police before transitioning to Royal Protection, if anyone would understand the significance of the challenge coin and help Charlotte deliver it discreetly, it would be Sarah. The next morning, Charlotte approached Sarah during a quiet moment when they were alone in the garden. The princess explained what she wanted to do, showed Sarah the envelope with the coin and note inside, and asked for help. She made clear that she did not want it to be a big public thing, that she did not want her parents to know because they would make it official, and that she just wanted the guard to receive it privately as a personal gesture of kindness and respect. Sarah listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. She understood immediately what Charlotte was asking and why it mattered. She also recognized the complications. Royal protocol existed for good reasons, and circumventing it, even with the best intentions, could create problems. But she also saw a 9-year-old girl trying to do something genuinely kind and compassionate, trying to reach across the formal barriers that separated her from ordinary people and make a human connection. Sarah Chen made her decision quickly. She told Charlotte that she would help, but with conditions. First, Charlotte had to understand that if anyone asked directly whether she had helped with this, Sarah would have to be honest. She would not lie to the Prince and Princess of Wales. Second, the delivery had to be done in a way that was respectful to everyone involved and did not create security concerns or protocol violations. Charlotte agreed immediately to both conditions, her face lighting up with relief and gratitude. That afternoon, Sarah made some discreet inquiries. She learned that Guardsman Thomas Whitmore had been released from medical care and was currently on light duty, covering at the Wellington barracks where his unit was stationed. The barracks were less than a mile from Buckingham Palace. Close enough that Sarah could potentially make a visit without raising too many questions. She had legitimate reasons to be there occasionally as part of her work coordinating with Palace security and military personnel. Sarah contacted an old colleague, a sergeant major she had served with years earlier who now worked at Wellington Barracks. She explained that she needed to deliver something to one of the guardsmen privately, something personal that was not going through official channels. The sergeant major asked few questions, understanding that in the military and royal protection world, sometimes discretion was more important than detailed explanations. He agreed to arrange for Sarah to meet with Guardsman Whitmore briefly. 2 days after the Trooping the Color ceremony, Sarah drove to Wellington Barracks during her scheduled break. She brought the envelope Charlotte had prepared, sealed carefully and protected in her jacket pocket. The barracks were impressive structures, historic buildings that housed the soldiers who performed ceremonial duties at the various royal palaces. The atmosphere was a mixture of military discipline and historic tradition, with soldiers in various states of dress moving purposefully through corridors and courtyards. The sergeant major met Sarah at the entrance and escorted her to a small office where Thomas Whitmore was waiting. The young guardsman stood immediately when Sarah entered, his posture rigid with military bearing despite his recent medical incident. He was in his regular army uniform rather than the ceremonial red tunic, and he looked healthy, though perhaps a bit tired. His expression was wary, uncertain about why a royal protection officer wanted to speak with him privately. Sarah introduced herself and asked Thomas to sit. She explained that she was not there in any official capacity, that this visit was not being recorded or reported, and that what she was about to give him was a personal gesture from someone who had witnessed his collapse during the ceremony. Thomas looked confused, unable to imagine who would send him something personal related to that embarrassing incident. Sarah pulled out the envelope and handed it to him. She explained that Princess Charlotte had been very concerned when she saw him fall, that the young princess had specifically asked about his well-being, and that she had wanted him to have this as a token of respect for his service and dedication. Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he took the envelope, not from heat exhaustion this time, but from the overwhelming surprise of what he was hearing. He opened the envelope carefully and pulled out the challenge coin. His eyes widened as he recognized what it was and processed its significance. Challenge coins were deeply meaningful in military culture, but receiving one from a member of the royal family, especially one delivered personally and privately, was almost unprecedented. He turned it over in his hands, examining the royal crest and regimental insignia, feeling the weight of it both physically and symbolically. Then he unfolded the note. The handwriting was clearly that of a child, careful and deliberate. Thomas read the words slowly, his throat tightening with emotion. The message was simple: a thank you for his service, an expression of hope that he was feeling better, and a note that she had been worried about him when he fell. It was signed with Princess Charlotte's name, and that small, drawn heart that somehow made the entire gesture even more touching. Thomas looked up at Sarah, his eyes suspiciously bright. He asked if this was really from the princess, if a 9-year-old girl had really been concerned enough about a random soldier collapsing to send him something this meaningful. Sarah confirmed that yes, it was entirely Charlotte's idea, that she had insisted on doing something for him, and that she had specifically wanted it to be private and personal rather than an official palace gesture. The young guardsman was overwhelmed. He explained to Sarah that collapsing during the ceremony had been the most humiliating moment of his military career. He had been convinced that he would be mocked by his fellow soldiers, that he had let down his regiment and embarrassed himself in front of the entire world. He had been replaying that moment over and over in his mind, beating himself up for not being strong enough to push through the heat and maintain his position. But this coin, this simple gesture from a child who did not even know him, somehow changed everything. It reframed the incident in his mind. Instead of being just a failure, it became a moment where his dedication and effort had been recognized, where his struggle had been witnessed with compassion rather than judgment. The fact that a princess had seen him fall and had responded with kindness rather than disappointment or criticism was profoundly healing. Sarah stayed for nearly half an hour, talking with Thomas about the incident, about the pressures of ceremonial duties, and about the unexpected impact of small acts of kindness. Thomas shared that he came from a working-class family in Manchester, that joining the Guards had been a dream and an honor, and that serving in such a visible role came with immense pressure to be perfect. The fear of public failure was something he carried with him constantly. Before Sarah left, Thomas asked her to convey his deepest gratitude to Princess Charlotte. He said he would treasure the coin for the rest of his life, that it would remind him that his service mattered, and that even in moments of weakness, there could be grace and recognition. Sarah promised to pass along his message, though she was not sure how or when she would be able to do so. Without revealing the whole story to Charlotte's parents, when Sarah returned to Kensington Palace that evening, she found Charlotte waiting anxiously. The princess had been distracted all day, wondering whether the guard had received her gift and what he had thought of it. Sarah sat down with Charlotte in a quiet corner of the residence and told her everything. She described Thomas's reaction, how moved he had been, how much the gesture had meant to him, and how grateful he was for her kindness. Charlotte listened with rapt attention, her face showing a range of emotions from relief to happiness to something deeper and more thoughtful. She asked Sarah several questions about the guard, wanting to know about him as a person, not just as the soldier who had fainted. Sarah shared what she could appropriately share, painting a picture of a dedicated young man who was working hard. To serve his country with honor, the young princess seemed satisfied, even happy, but also thoughtful in a way that suggested she was processing something important. She thanked Sarah for helping her, for making it possible to do something that had felt so important to her. Sarah reminded Charlotte gently that they had bent some rules, so that if her parents asked directly about it, she would have to be honest. Charlotte nodded, understanding the implicit lesson about integrity and honesty, even when keeping secrets. For several weeks, the matter remained private. Charlotte returned to her normal routines of school, official appearances, and family time. The media coverage of Trooping the Color had moved on to other stories. Thomas Whitmore recovered fully and returned to active ceremonial duty. The challenge coin he had received sat in a place of honor in his quarters, a tangible reminder of an unexpected moment of grace. But secrets in the royal world, even well-intentioned ones, have a way of eventually coming to light. About a month after the incident, Catherine was having a casual conversation with Sarah Chen about Charlotte's recent behavior and development. The princess had seemed more thoughtful lately, more interested in the lives of the people who worked around the family, more conscious of her actions and their impacts on others. During this conversation, Catherine mentioned that she had noticed Charlotte asking more questions about the military personnel who protected the family and worked at the palaces. She wondered if something had sparked this increased interest. Sarah found herself in an uncomfortable position, bound by her promise to be honest if asked directly, but also wanting to respect Charlotte's desire for privacy about her gesture. Sarah made a careful decision. She told Catherine that she thought Charlotte had been affected by seeing the guard collapse during Trooping the Color, that the princess had been concerned about him and had wanted to do something kind. Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly with maternal intuition that sensed there was more to the story. She asked Sarah directly if Charlotte had done something specific. Bound by her word, Sarah explained what had happened. She described Charlotte's determination to give the guard her challenge coin, the private note she had written, and how Sarah had helped facilitate the delivery. She was careful to emphasize that Charlotte's motivations had been purely compassionate, that the gesture had been deeply meaningful to the guardsmen, and that it had been handled discreetly and safely. Catherine's initial reaction was complex. She felt a flash of concern that Charlotte had acted outside of protocol, that Sarah had helped circumvent normal channels, and that something could have gone wrong or been misinterpreted. But these concerns were quickly overtaken by a deep sense of pride in her daughter's empathy and initiative. Charlotte had seen someone in distress, had felt compelled to help in a meaningful way, and had found a method to do so that was both personal and appropriate. That evening, Catherine spoke with William about what she had learned. The Prince of Wales had a similar initial reaction of concern followed by pride. They discussed whether they should address it with Charlotte, whether this was something that needed correction or acknowledgement. William pointed out that Charlotte's instinct had been exactly right, that reaching out with personal kindness to someone who had struggled publicly was precisely the kind of behavior they wanted to encourage in their children. Catherine agreed, but noted that there were also lessons to be learned about communication and protocol. She suggested that they should talk with Charlotte, not to reprimand her, but to understand her thinking and perhaps guide her on how to handle similar situations in the future. William supported this approach, and they agreed to have a family conversation with Charlotte the next day, the following afternoon. William and Catherine sat down with Charlotte in the family's private living room at Kensington Palace. Charlotte could tell from their serious expressions that they knew about the coin, and her face showed worry that she might be in trouble. Catherine immediately reassured her that she was not in trouble, that they were not angry, but that they wanted to talk about what she had done and why she had felt it was important. Charlotte explained her reasoning with the earnest honesty of a child who was trying to do the right thing. She described watching the guard fall, feeling worried about him, and wanting to do something that would make him feel better. She explained that she had not told them because she thought they would make it into an official thing. She wanted it to be personal and private. She said she knew the coin was special, and that giving it to someone who served the family seemed like the right thing to do. William and Catherine listened without interrupting, letting their daughter fully express her thoughts and feelings. When she finished, William told her that he was proud of her compassion and her desire to help someone who was struggling. He explained that the gesture she had made was exactly the kind of thoughtful, personal connection that made the monarchy meaningful to ordinary people. Catherine added that Charlotte's instinct to recognize someone's service and dedication was admirable and important. However, they also gently addressed the protocol concerns. Catherine explained that while Charlotte's intentions had been wonderful, there were reasons why the royal family usually went through official channels for such gestures. Safety was one concern, ensuring that any interaction with members of the public was secure and appropriate. But there were also considerations about fairness and precedent. If one soldier received a personal gift from a princess, others might wonder why they had not, or might feel that their service was less valued. Charlotte listened carefully, her face showing that she was processing these more complex considerations. She asked if what she had done was wrong, if she should not have given the guard the coin. William shook his head immediately. He said that the act itself was beautiful and right, but that as she got older and took on more royal responsibilities, she would need to think through the implications of her actions more carefully. Catherine suggested that in the future, if Charlotte wanted to do something special for someone, she should talk with her parents about it first. They could help her find ways to act on her compassionate instincts, while also managing the various protocols and considerations that came with being a member of the royal family. Charlotte agreed, understanding that this was about learning to balance her personal values with her public role. Asterisk. The conversation with her parents left Charlotte feeling both understood and more aware of the complexities of her position. She appreciated that they had not punished her or dismissed her gesture as childish impulsiveness. Instead, they had taken her seriously, acknowledged the goodness of her intentions, and helped her understand the broader context of her actions. It was a teaching moment that would shape how she approached her royal responsibilities in the years to come. William decided that there was one more conversation that needed to happen. He contacted the commanding officer of the Grenadier Guards and arranged a private meeting. During that meeting, William explained what Charlotte had done, emphasizing that it had been entirely her own initiative driven by genuine concern. He wanted to ensure that the gesture was properly understood within the military context, and that Guardsman Whitmore would not face any negative consequences or awkward scrutiny from his superiors or fellow soldiers. The commanding officer was deeply moved by the story. He assured William that far from being a problem, Charlotte's gesture represented exactly the kind of connection between the royal family and the military that strengthened morale and reinforced the meaning behind the ceremonial duties his soldiers performed. He promised that while he would need to make a note of the incident in the appropriate files for record-keeping purposes, he would ensure it was framed positively and that Whitmore would be protected from any unwanted attention or teasing from peers. The commanding officer also shared some context that William found illuminating. He explained that heat-related casualties during ceremonial duties were unfortunately common, especially during summer months when soldiers stood in heavy wool uniforms for extended periods. The guards took extensive precautions, including medical personnel on standby and clear protocols for removing soldiers who were in distress. But sometimes bodies simply reached their limits despite the best preparation. More importantly, commanding officer explained that the psychological impact of collapsing on parade could be significant for young soldiers. Many felt deep shame and embarrassment, worried about their reputations and their futures in the regiment. Having something positive come from such an incident, having a member of the royal family express care and concern rather than disappointment, could be genuinely transformative. What Charlotte had done, perhaps without fully realizing it, was provide that positive reframing. William asked if he could meet Guardsman Whitmore himself, to thank him for his service and perhaps provide some additional encouragement. The commanding officer arranged for this meeting to take place the following week, again at Wellington Barracks, in a setting that would be private but appropriate for such an interaction. When the meeting occurred, Thomas Whitmore was understandably nervous, being summoned to meet the Prince of Wales. Privately was not something that happened to junior guardsmen under normal circumstances. He wore his dress uniform, made sure every button was polished and every crease was sharp, and tried to prepare himself mentally for whatever this meeting might entail. William arrived with minimal fanfare, accompanied only by his personal protection officer. He immediately put Thomas at ease with his friendly demeanor and genuine warmth. The prince explained that he had learned about Charlotte's gift and had wanted to meet Thomas personally to add his own thanks for the guardsman's service and dedication. He made clear that no one thought less of Thomas for collapsing in the heat, that it could happen to anyone, and that pushing oneself to the point of physical breakdown in service of duty was actually evidence of extraordinary commitment rather than weakness. Thomas, more relaxed now, shared his perspective on the incident and its aftermath. He described how difficult the immediate aftermath had been, how he had questioned whether he was truly cut out for the guards, and how Charlotte's gesture had arrived at exactly the moment when he needed it most. He showed William the challenge coin, which he now carried with him at all times, and explained that it had become something of a talisman for him, a reminder that his service mattered and was appreciated. William was touched by Thomas's honesty and vulnerability. He talked about the pressures that came with public service of any kind, how the fear of failure or public embarrassment could be paralyzing, and how important it was to have moments of grace and encouragement to sustain one through difficult times. He mentioned that even as Prince of Wales, he sometimes struggled with the weight of public scrutiny and the pressure to never make mistakes. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, ranging far beyond the initial incident to discuss Thomas's background, his reasons for joining the military, his hopes for his career, and his thoughts about service and duty. William was impressed by the young man's character and thoughtfulness. Before leaving, the prince did something unexpected. He presented Thomas with his own challenge coin, a personal one that William carried and occasionally gave to individuals who'd made an impression on him or demonstrated exceptional qualities. Thomas was stunned. To receive one challenge coin from a member of the royal family was extraordinary. To receive two, one from a 9-year-old princess and one from the future king, was almost beyond comprehension. William explained that he wanted Thomas to know that his service was valued at the highest levels, that his dedication had been noticed, and that the royal family genuinely cared about the soldiers who protected them and represented them in ceremonial duties. As William prepared to leave, Thomas gathered his courage and asked if there was any way he could thank Princess Charlotte properly for her kindness. William smiled and said he would convey Thomas's gratitude, but he also suggested that the best way to thank Charlotte would be to continue serving with the same dedication and heart that had characterized his service so far, and perhaps to extend similar kindness to others when he had the opportunity. Back at Kensington Palace, William shared the details of his meeting with Catherine and Charlotte. The young princess listened with fascination, pleased to hear that the guard was doing well and that her gesture had meant so much to him. When William gave her Thomas's message of gratitude, Charlotte smiled shyly, but with obvious pleasure. She asked if she might ever meet him properly, perhaps at some future event where they could talk. Catherine and William exchanged glances. recognizing that their daughter was processing this experience in ways that would shape her approach to royal duties and human connection in the future. They explained that such a meeting might be possible someday, but that it would need to be in an appropriate context and at the right time. Charlotte accepted this, understanding now more of the careful balance required in her position. The story might have ended there, a private moment of kindness between a princess and a guardsman, known only to a small circle of people and remaining forever outside of public knowledge. But fate and circumstance had other plans. Several months later, during a different ceremonial event at Buckingham Palace, a photographer with particularly sharp eyes and good instincts captured an image that would eventually bring the story to light. The event was a ceremony honoring military personnel who had demonstrated exceptional service. Thomas Whitmore was among those being recognized, having been selected by his commanding officer for a commendation related to his overall performance and dedication to duty. The royal family was present for the ceremony, including Charlotte, who attended alongside her parents and siblings. The photographer, a veteran royal watcher named Margaret Stevens, who had been covering the family for over 20 years, noticed something interesting during the ceremony. When Charlotte walked past the line of military personnel being honored, she paused almost imperceptibly when she came to Thomas Whitmore. The pause lasted barely a second, but there was a moment of eye contact. A small smile exchanged, a subtle nod of recognition between them. Margaret captured the moment, though she did not fully understand its significance at the time. She filed the photos with her agency along with dozens of other images from the ceremony. But something about that particular photo nagged at her. There was a story there, some connection between the young princess and this particular guardsman that was not immediately obvious. Margaret began doing what good journalists do. She asked questions and followed threads. She learned that Thomas Whitmore was the guardsman who had collapsed during the previous summer's Trooping the Color. She discovered through careful inquiries and conversations with various sources that there had been some kind of private interaction between the Wales family and Whitmore following that incident, though no one would provide specific details. The more Margaret investigated, the more intrigued she became. This was clearly not a typical story of royal acknowledgement of military service. There was something more personal, something that had happened outside of official channels. She approached it carefully, knowing that rushing to publish with incomplete information or invading privacy could damage both her reputation and the people involved in the story. Eventually, through a combination of Margaret's skilled investigation and a few careful leaks from people who thought the story deserved to be told, the basic outline came together. A palace source, speaking on condition of anonymity, confirmed that Princess Charlotte had indeed sent a personal gift to Guardsman Whitmore after his collapse, that it had been her own idea, and that it had been handled privately at her request. Margaret now faced a decision. She had a story that would certainly be of interest to the public. A young princess, demonstrating remarkable compassion and initiative, a heartwarming tale of kindness across social divides, a narrative that showed the human side of the royal family. But she also knew that publishing the story could violate the privacy that Charlotte had specifically wanted, could create unwanted attention for Thomas Whitmore, and might even result in consequences for those who had helped facilitate Charlotte's gesture. Margaret decided to take an unusual approach. Rather than publishing the story immediately through her agency, where it would be picked up and sensationalized by tabloids worldwide, she wrote a carefully crafted article that emphasized the positive aspects of the story while respecting the privacy of those involved. She submitted it to a respected British newspaper known for more thoughtful royal coverage, and she worked with the editors to ensure the tone remained respectful and appropriate. Before publication, Margaret did something that not all journalists would do. She contacted the palace press office and informed them that she had the story and intended to publish it, but that she wanted to give them an opportunity to provide context or request any particular considerations. She made clear that she was not asking for permission, but that she wanted to be responsible in how the story was told. The palace press office was caught off guard. They had known about Charlotte's gesture, of course, but had not expected it to become public knowledge. After consultations with William and Catherine, they provided Margaret with a brief statement. The statement confirmed the basic facts, that Princess Charlotte had been concerned about the guardsman who collapsed during trooping the color, that she had sent him a personal token of support, and that the gesture had been made privately at her own initiative. The statement emphasized that this was an example of the compassion and awareness the Prince and Princess of Wales were working to instill in their children. When Margaret's article was published, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The story was picked up by media outlets around the world. Social media exploded with praise for Charlotte's kindness and emotional intelligence. The general public is often cynical about the royal family, and sometimes critical of the privileges and disconnection they perceived, responded to this story with genuine warmth and approval. The narrative that emerged was powerful. A young princess, despite her elevated position and comfortable life, had noticed the suffering of an individual person and had felt compelled to respond with personal kindness. She had not wanted publicity or credit. She had simply wanted to help someone who was struggling. In an age of performative charity and carefully orchestrated public relations, Charlotte's gesture stood out as authentic and sincere. Thomas Whitmore suddenly found himself at the center of media attention, something he had never wanted or expected. His commanding officer helped him prepare for the inevitable interview requests and public interest. Thomas handled it with remarkable grace, emphasizing repeatedly that Charlotte's kindness had meant everything to him and that it had reminded him why service to others was so important and meaningful. He spoke about the challenge coin Charlotte had given him, describing it as one of his most treasured possessions. He mentioned that he now carried both coin Charlotte's and William's with him, always, and that they served as reminders not just of royal appreciation but of the broader value of compassion and human connection. His interviews revealed him to be thoughtful, humble, and deeply committed to his role, which only made the story more compelling. The public response to the story was remarkable in its unanimity and warmth. Across social media platforms, people shared the article and expressed admiration for Charlotte's compassion. Parenting experts praised William and Catherine for raising a child with such emotional awareness and empathy. Military veterans and active service members expressed appreciation that a member of the royal family had recognized the human cost of ceremonial duties and had responded with personal kindness. Rather than formal detachment, the story became even more meaningful when seen in the broader context of the royal family's evolution. For decades, the monarchy had struggled to balance tradition with relevance, formality with authenticity, institutional distance with human connection. Charlotte's gesture represented a bridge between these often conflicting demands. She had honored tradition by giving a military challenge coin, a gesture steeped in protocol and meaning, but she had done so in a way that was personal, spontaneous, and deeply human. Child development experts weighed in on what Charlotte's actions revealed about her character and upbringing. They noted that empathy of this kind, the ability to notice someone else's distress and feel compelled to respond, was not automatic in children. It had to be modeled and encouraged by parents and caregivers. The fact that Charlotte had thought to give away something precious to her, had written a personal note, and had insisted on privacy rather than recognition suggested sophisticated emotional intelligence and a value system focused on genuine care rather than performance. William and Catherine initially had mixed feelings about the story becoming public. They had respected Charlotte's desire for privacy and had not intended for her gesture to be used as a public relations opportunity. However, they also recognized that the overwhelming positive response was meaningful and that the story was inspiring genuine reflection about kindness, service, and human connection. They decided to address it briefly during a scheduled interview about their family and charitable work. During the interview, Catherine spoke about how proud she was of Charlotte's compassionate instinct. She explained that she and William tried to teach their children that their privileged position came with responsibilities, and that one of the most important responsibilities was to see and value the people around them as individuals, not just as roles or functions. She mentioned that Charlotte's gesture had actually taught her and William something as well, reminding them of the importance of personal connection over institutional formality. William added that while they tried to protect their children from excessive public scrutiny, This particular story felt important to acknowledge because it represented values they hoped to instill not just in their own children, but in the broader culture. He spoke about the military service and sacrifice, about the physical and mental challenges faced by the soldiers who performed ceremonial duties, and about how Charlotte's simple gesture of recognition had meant so much to one individual while also symbolizing a broader appreciation for all who served. The interview was carefully handled, with both parents ensuring that Charlotte herself was not exposed to overwhelming attention. They had explained to her that the story had become public and that people were talking about what she had done, but they shielded her from most of the media coverage and social media commentary. They wanted her to understand that her actions had touched many people, but they did not want her to become self-conscious or to feel pressure to perform kindness for public consumption in the future. Charlotte's response to learning that the story was public was characteristically thoughtful. She was embarrassed by the attention, but also quietly pleased that people seemed to appreciate what she had done. She asked her parents if Thomas was okay with everyone knowing about it, concerned that the attention might be uncomfortable for him. When assured that he was handling it well and that he appreciated people knowing the story, Charlotte seemed satisfied. The incident had ripple effects that extended beyond the immediate story. The Grenadier Guards reported a significant increase in public interest and support following the coverage, with many people expressing newfound appreciation for the ceremonial soldiers they had previously seen as merely decorative figures in tourist photographs. Donations to military charities increased, and several organizations reported that they had been contacted by people wanting to support soldiers dealing with physical and mental health challenges. Coins themselves experienced a surge of interest. Military organizations and veteran groups found themselves fielding questions about the tradition and its significance. Some groups began programs to send challenge coins to service members as morale boosters, inspired by Charlotte's gesture. The story had sparked a broader conversation about recognition, appreciation, and the small gestures that could have outsized impacts on people facing difficult circumstances. Several months after the story became public, Thomas Whitmore was invited to speak at a military event about leadership and morale. During his talk, he shared his experience of collapsing on parade and the impact that Charlotte's gesture had on his recovery, his perspective on service. He spoke eloquently about how one moment of kindness from an unexpected source had reframed his entire understanding of why he served and what his service meant. Thomas explained to the audience that before receiving Charlotte's coin, he had thought about his role primarily in terms of performance and perfection. He had believed that his value as a guardsman was measured entirely by his ability to execute ceremonial duties flawlessly. The collapse had shattered that self-image and left him questioning everything. But Charlotte's gesture had helped him understand that service was about dedication and heart. It's not just physical perfection. It was about the effort and commitment, not just the outcome. His talk resonated deeply with the service members in attendance, many of whom had similar experiences with failure, setback, or public embarrassment. The fact that a member of the royal family had seen past the failure to recognize the underlying dedication and effort was powerful and meaningful. Thomas became something of an informal spokesperson for mental health and emotional well-being in the military, using his platform to encourage fellow service members to seek help when struggling and to remember that their worth is not determined by individual moments of imperfection. William and Catherine were impressed by how Thomas had used his experience to benefit others. They invited him to participate in a roundtable discussion about mental health in the armed forces, an issue both had been working on through their charitable foundation. During that discussion, Thomas provided valuable frontline perspective on the pressures facing junior military personnel and the importance of creating cultures where struggle was not equated with weakness. Charlotte, now a bit older and more aware of the public dimension of her role, asked if she could send Thomas another note, this time thanking him for speaking about mental health and using his experience to help others. William and Catherine approved, and this time they helped Charlotte craft the message and send it through appropriate official channels. The note was brief but heartfelt, expressing pride that her small gesture had contributed to something larger and more meaningful. Thomas framed this second note alongside the first one in his quarters, creating a small shrine that reminded him daily of the unexpected ways that kindness could multiply and ripple outward. Other soldiers who visited his quarters would see the display and ask about it, giving Thomas opportunities to share the story and its lessons about compassion, recognition, and the importance of looking out for one another. The story of Charlotte's gesture became part of the training curriculum for new royal protection officers. Sarah Chen, who had helped facilitate the original gift, was asked to share the experience during training sessions. She used it as a case study in judgment calls, discussing how she had weighed protocol against compassion, how she had ensured the gesture was handled safely and appropriately, and how sometimes the most impactful moments came from following the spirit of service rather than just the letter of rules. Sarah emphasized to trainees that their role was not just about physical protection, but about facilitating the human connections that made the royal family relevant and meaningful to ordinary people. She discussed the importance of discretion, of knowing when to follow standard protocols and when to find creative solutions to support the principals in their desire to connect authentically with the public. Charlotte's gesture had reinforced for Sarah why she had chosen this career. By protecting people who use their platforms for good was meaningful work. The palace itself learned lessons from how the story had unfolded. The communications team developed new protocols for situations where private gestures by family members might become public. They created guidelines for how to confirm and frame such stories in ways that respected the privacy and intentions of those involved, while also managing public interest responsibly. The experience had demonstrated that trying to keep everything private was neither realistic nor necessarily desirable, but that careful management could allow positive stories to be shared without exploitation. As Charlotte grew older and took on more royal responsibilities, the incident with Thomas Whitmore remained a touchstone for her. When she struggled with the constraints and expectations of her position, when she felt frustrated by protocol or overwhelmed by attention, she would remember that moment when she had simply seen someone suffering and had tried to help. It reminded her that beneath all the formality and tradition, her role was ultimately about service and human connection. On the first anniversary of the original incident, Charlotte asked her parents if she could do something to acknowledge the day. Together, they decided that she would write a letter to be shared with all. The military units that performed ceremonial duties at royal palaces, the letter expressed gratitude for their service and sacrifice, acknowledged the challenges they faced, and emphasized that their dedication was noticed and valued by the royal family. The letter was distributed quietly through military channels and was received with appreciation by service members across the ceremonial units. It reinforced the message that Charlotte's gesture to Thomas Whitmore had not been a one-time impulse, but represented a genuine value system and sustained commitment to recognizing those who served. Several soldiers wrote back with their own thank you messages, creating an informal correspondence that Charlotte treasured. Thomas Whitmore continued his military career with distinction. The collapse that had once seemed like a career-ending embarrassment had instead become the foundation for a powerful personal narrative about resilience, grace, and the importance of human connection. He was eventually promoted to corporal and then sergeant, and he brought to his leadership roles a particular emphasis on caring for the well-being of the soldiers under his command. When he trained new guardsmen, Thomas would tell them about the importance of looking out for each other during ceremonial duties, about recognizing the signs of heat exhaustion or distress in their fellow soldiers, and about remembering that they were human beings with limits, not just ceremonial props. He would mention, without dwelling on it too much, that a moment of vulnerability during a ceremony had led to one of the most meaningful experiences of his life, a reminder that even our struggles could connect us to others in unexpected ways. Years later, when Charlotte was a teenager preparing for more formal royal duties, she asked to meet with Thomas again. She was working on a speech about service and sacrifice and wanted to hear his perspective on what motivated people to serve in challenging roles. William and Catherine facilitated the meeting, which took place at Kensington Palace in a comfortable setting that encouraged genuine conversation. Thomas, now more experienced and confident, spoke with Charlotte about his journey through military service. He talked about the pride and purpose he found in his role, about the camaraderie with fellow soldiers, and about the challenges of balancing the ceremonial aspects with the actual security responsibilities of the guards. He mentioned that her gesture years earlier had fundamentally shaped how he thought about service, helping him understand that the value of what he did was not just in the perfect execution of duties, but in the dedication and heart he brought to the work. Charlotte, now 15 and more articulate about her own thoughts and feelings, told Thomas about how that incident had affected her as well. She explained that it had been the first time she had really understood that her actions could have meaningful impacts on individual people's lives. It had taught her that her position came with opportunities to make real differences, not just through big charitable initiatives, but through small personal acts of recognition and kindness. They discussed the responsibilities that came with public roles, the challenges of maintaining authenticity while meeting institutional expectations, and the importance of finding meaning and purpose in service. It was a conversation between two people who occupied very different positions in society, but who had been connected by a moment of shared humanity, and had both been changed by it. At the end of their conversation, Thomas gave Charlotte something he had been saving for this opportunity. It was a challenge coin from his unit, similar to the one she had given him years earlier, but representing his current rank and responsibilities. He explained that in military tradition, challenge coins were often exchanged between service members as tokens of mutual respect and connection. He wanted her to have this as a symbol that her gesture had not been one-sided, that she had given him something invaluable, and that he wanted to acknowledge that gift with one of his own. Charlotte accepted the coin with visible emotion, understanding the significance of the gesture. She promised to treasure it as he had treasured hers, and to let it remind her of the lessons she had learned from their unlikely connection. The exchange represented a full circle, completion of a story that had begun with a 9-year-old's compassionate impulse and had grown into something much larger and more. The media never learned about this second meeting. It remained private, known only to those directly involved, and carefully protected from public scrutiny. Both Charlotte and Thomas preferred it that way, understanding that some moments were more powerful when they remained personal rather than becoming public spectacles. The original story had served its purpose in inspiring others and demonstrating important values. This follow-up was for them, a quiet affirmation of the connection they had formed and the ongoing impact it had on both their lives. As Charlotte moved forward into young adulthood and increased royal responsibilities, she carried with her the lessons from that summer day when she had watched a guard collapse in the heat. She had learned that noticing individual human struggles mattered, that small gestures could have profound impacts, that authenticity was more powerful than performance, and that her privilege and position gave her both opportunities and responsibilities to connect with and uplift others. Thomas carried similar lessons into his continued service and eventual civilian life. He never forgot that a child's compassion had helped him through one of his darkest moments, that recognition and appreciation from unexpected sources could be transformative, and that his struggles had purpose beyond just personal challenge. The 2 challenge coins he had received remained among his most prized possessions, tangible reminders of grace, kindness, and human connection. The story itself became part of the broader narrative about the royal family's evolution, an example of how the institution was learning to balance tradition with humanity, formality with authenticity, distance with connection. It demonstrated that the most powerful moments were often the unplanned ones, the genuine expressions of care that could not be scripted or staged. Princess Charlotte's secret gift to a fainting royal guard, a moment the media had initially missed, became one of the most meaningful stories about the modern monarchy, a reminder that sometimes the most important acts were the quiet, personal ones done without expectation of recognition or reward.